This is bad cable management. This is good cable management. This is better cable management. We can do better still. This is my Playseat Trophy cockpit with Fanatec wheel, and as you can see, it's pretty clean. But when I look at this, I thought there's got to be a better way to do it. I kind of obsessed about it and decided we're going to run those cables inside the frame. So the first thing I did is remove the wheelbase, which is bolted to the plate from underneath and a little tricky to get to. But once I got that off, then I measured out to find the center to where I want to drill the hole to run these cables through. And that hole needs to be large enough to get all the connectors through, or at least most of the connectors. We'll get to that in a little bit. So it is I'm thinking it's about an 1/8 inch thick aluminum plate. So it's a soft metal, it's not too hard to get through, but I decided to do it in stages, and I edited out some of those stages. But once I'm done drilling, then I used a small hand file to clean it up, deburr it, and decided I was not going to use rubber grommets. I'm just going to make these nice and clean because they're not going to move. They don't need to be weather tight. I think I'm going to be good there. So now we move on to the frame. That section of my frame was also aluminum and holds the frame pieces, those side pieces together. So same basic exercise here. Drill it out and then file it clean. I also have a battery operated Dremel type rotary tool to clean that up. So now we move down to the bottom of the frame to where I'm going to bring these cables through. So if you haven't figured it out, I'm making holes to run these cables down. Now that I've got that bottom hole, all the holes are now drilled and clean. I used a piece of wire that's actually for wiring guitars, but it was like stiff enough because it has a like flexible cover on it, so it was rigid enough. Ran it down through the frame, pull it out, and now it's time to deal with the wiring harness. The wiring harness for power was not long enough. So I got to extend this guy. So we're going to kind of rip through this pretty quickly, but stripping wires and extending it all by about 18 inches. It was probably more than I really needed, but I figured since I'm going through this exercise, I may as well give myself more than enough. I'm only doing half the wiring harness at this point. I'm going to solder the other half in after pulling. So speaking of pulling the wires, I'm going to tape the USB cable, the RJ12 cable, I think it is. Maybe it's an RJ45, the Ethernet looking cable, and the power cable that you see kind of halfway done here. So taped them all apart, and you can see those little magnetic things that go over the cable to help with electromagnetic interference. And those were a little bit problematic and kind of sticking in there, as you can see. So what I did is took my Dremel and just shaved some of the rubber off of there, some of the plastic cover, just to get it to all fit snugly into there. The holes that I drilled were like barely big enough to get all the wire with and the connectors and those magnets to get through there. After shaving that plastic, I was able to fit everything in there with a little bit of a push. Now we pull everything back up to the top of the frame by pushing and feeding it through from the bottom while pulling that white wire from the top. The connectors are going to snag a little bit as you get in there, and it's a little bit of an effort to get those magnets to come through, but we got it all through. Now it's time to solder that other half of the connector in. I just thought it would be easier to do this since it was already apart rather than try to pull that power connector through, because that is the biggest connector in the bunch to try to make this work with. So Now it's twisting some copper wires, getting my $7 Amazon soldering iron out, and reattaching all of this stuff along with some shrink tube. Keep it all nice and clean and secure and not have to worry about it. So I'm surprised how well that $7 Amazon soldering iron actually worked for this. I bought that soldering iron with the intention of never using it to solder. I was going to turn it into a smoke machine to try to hunt down some vacuum leaks in a car, but those issues resolve themselves. Now it's time to get all these connectors back up through the wheel plate. That hole is just barely big enough to make this work, but it was big enough. So that is the power connector. And then I've got the Ethernet cable coming through, followed finally by the USB-C, and that's it. So now it's time to get that wheelbase reinstalled. Slide it back over these fasteners, get it nice and tight all the way back into place. I'm using 4 of those fasteners. They're pretty close to the edge at the rear of the wheelbase, but they are catching, and I like the idea of using 4 fasteners rather than just the 2. I think the 2 bolted down tight, probably good enough, but the power connector then gets pushed in. These cables are a little tight, but that is how I wanted it. I wanted that hole to basically disappear underneath the wheelbase, and that's pretty much what I got. It's really, really close. I did consider having something 3D printed to cover up the rear, but I think I'm going to leave it like this, especially just the full circle of the rear of that with the blue trim looks pretty cool. So I'm going to leave just those 3 cables going through. It's time to move to the bottom of the rig here, get this pedal box reinstalled. I had to go back and look at the original video footage to see where those things, those fasteners lined up, because I completely forgot. You can see I am running 2 pedals, not a clutch. I did spring for the load cell kit, so I just moved that one into the left position. The other pedal, the original brake, is just in storage. I used the 3M dual lock tape to put the power supply for the whole rig, and that is an upgraded power supply. I think when I used too much of that dual lock tape, it was really hard to get it to kind of line up and snap in, but we did get it secured. Where that power supply is, you're still able to get the IEC cable then plugged in without any interference. It is pretty close to the bottom of that pedal box, but there is just enough. So now it's zip tie this cable in. We're gonna cut the ends off. I like to use that pliers, grab the end of the zip tie and then twist it to break it off nice and even, so you don't go get those little jagged edges that cut you when you're trying to work around it. So the last one to deal with here is that USB cable, and I've got a much longer cable than I really need, so we're gonna just kind of wrap it up, tie it underneath. The way I use my rig is it is right up to the TV, so I need very little excess USB cable to be able to plug it into my PS5. And then what we're going to end up with here is just 2 cables to deal with. One coming from the entertainment center, the IEC, so I can plug into power, and then the USB cable coming from the rig to plug directly into the PS5. So just winding these cables up. We're going to get some more zip ties in there, make this all nice and clean. And then the final thing I did was use some electrical tape to bring that USB cable to the edge of the pedal box, that bottom plate. Just a couple pieces of electrical tape to keep that thing from falling down. I didn't want to have to, reach underneath to search for that cable. So this way it comes right to the top. Then when we flip the rig over, I can just pull that USB cable back and everything is nice and clean. So here we can see where the hole at the bottom of the frame comes through, and the last thing to do is put the steering wheel back on and lock it into place. Now with the rig in front of the TV, there's a USB cable, plugs right into that PS5. We pull the IEC cable, the power cable that goes to the power supply, out from the entertainment center, plug it in, we're good to go. That's it. So that is all of the cable that is exposed now. Even though the previous version had those 3 cables taped and zip tied to the frame and it wasn't terrible looking, this looks better, much better in my opinion. You see no cables there, so that's the rig. That's where I store it typically, and then when it's time to race, drag that out into place right in front of the TV in the entertainment center, and there's what it looks like. Nice and clean, just those 2 cables. That's it. Here's some close-ups for you. Just those 3 cables, they turn back, go down underneath. So really when you're using it and even in storage, you don't see it. Those cables are all running inside, popping out through the bottom, super clean. A few things I would do differently if I was doing this again. Make sure you've got the right size drill and drill bit. I had to try to ream those holes to make them big enough, file, Dremel, and it just took way longer than it should have. I would do this outside or in a garage. It did make a mess. I had that cardboard down, but there's still stuff kind of flying all over. I would remove the stickers and then put them back when you're done. I did hit that one with the drill, with the file, so it's marred up a little bit, but not terrible. I would have done something to protect the paint, probably just some blue tape around where I was drilling and filing, because the file slips, the Dremel slips, and you end up scratching it. So most of that's hidden. It's not terrible, but that's what I would do differently. So is this a drastic difference in cable management? No, but for me, it's cleaner and definitely worth the effort. If you have any questions, drop them in the comments below, and thanks for watching.